Вже штук 20 пролетіло. Не видно українського герба. Точно російські.
Legendary videos from the start of the full-scale war of Russia against Ukraine. My friends, in this video we're gonna review the events which happened 3 years ago. Then Putin made his final decision to attack a neighboring country, Ukraine. We're gonna go through details and I'm gonna explain you what happened before the full-scale war and during the first day, hour by hour, minute by minute. Hello my friends and welcome. My name is Dennis. Let's go. There was the information published by media sources around the world telling that it's imminent that Russia will start the war against Ukraine. Nevertheless, leaders tried to convince Putin at the very last moment, as you can see on the screen, where Putin split himself from the rest of the world with this very long table. And before, Russian representatives were telling that Ukraine is not following Minsk agreements, that Russia will exit those. Minsk agreement was the peace deal between Ukraine and Russia under the mediation of the European partners. However, the deal, as we can see, was a failure from the very beginning. On 13th of December 2021, so less than 2 months before the start of the war, the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, called Putin and tried to convince him to stop the preparations for the war, because actually, United States had the confirmation that Russia is preparing for it because Russia sent their reinforcements to Belarus, and they were also getting ready near Ukrainian border on the Russian territory. And probably that day Joe Biden understood that he is unable to stop Putin. At the same time, Ukrainian President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government in general seems like didn't believe for the start of the war. Well, at least that is what we heard from the Ukrainian TV. I was in Ukraine by the time, I'm Ukrainian myself, and the Ukrainian government, together with Zelensky, reassured people that everything is okay, those are just speculations. And I would say that the large part of the Ukrainian population definitely didn't expect this war to happen. They didn't think that Putin would be so crazy to start it. However, the talks about the possible war continues, and the more closer we were to the end of the February, the more hotter the informational field was around Ukraine and Russia. On 18th of February, there are several of the strikes in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, which were temporarily controlled by so-called self-proclaimed republics, DPR and LPR. Russian media immediately called it as a provocation from Ukrainian side. The Russian-backed separatists even announced the evacuation from the eastern Ukraine from their controlled territory towards Russia, and this is a very old article. You can see 18th of February 2022. Here we see a renewed bombing, but actually 3 or maximum 4 of the facilities were targeted. But the news were so exaggerated by the Russian media, so they started this fake evacuation. Fake, I mean, because there was really nothing to protect those people from. Ukraine wasn't shooting at Donetsk for years. There were some of the clashes at the front line, but those were just minor. Then the leaders of so-called republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, Pushilin and Pasechnik, asked Putin to recognize the sovereignty of the self-proclaimed republics. Before, the idea for the Russian government was that those should be the parts of the Ukraine, but separatists would be represented in the Ukrainian parliament, pro-Russian forces, which is total nonsense.
От имени всего народа Донецкой Народной Республики просим вас признать Донецкую Народную Республику как независимое, демократическое, правовое, социальное государство.
It was Pushilin and the same stuff we heard from Pasechnik, and by the time it was the 21st of February, I already understood that it's gonna be hot. I thought that Russia would just back up those separatists and escalate their military actions in Donbass only. But I was wrong. Few hours after that message from the self-proclaimed republic leaders was shown in the media, the Russian media started their own program showing the security meeting of Putin and the managers of the security bloc of Russia, military intelligence and so on. This video was pre-recorded, so everything of that was just a circus.
Две независимые республики, Донецкую Народную Республику и Луганскую Народную Республику.
On this meeting, Lavrov said that NATO should withdraw its forces from Baltic countries, Poland, Romania, and so on, because it destabilized the Russian security. Dmitry Kozak, who was responsible for negotiations and implementing the Minsk agreements between Russia and Ukraine, stating that there was no move in achieving those Minsk agreements since 2015, and they are no longer valid. It's for you to understand of how Russia values any sort of the peace agreements with them. Ahead of the Russian FSB, Bortnikov said that they've demolished some of the sabotage groups of the Ukrainian armed forces who tried to cross the border. A Russian defense minister Shoigu stated that there is the fear that Ukraine could return nuclear weaponry. And yes, Putin's puppet, the ex-Russian president Medvedev, and actually here he was correct, judging from the current perspective from today's day. Let's listen what he said.
Как устроена история человеческая, что от этой ситуации рано или поздно устанут и сами будут просить нас вернуться к возврату, к дискуссиям, к переговорам по всем вопросам обеспечения стратегической безопасности.
That is what is happening from Donald Trump's side today. Patrushev, a great cardinal of the Russian policy and a head of the Russian Security Committee.
Переговоры надо вести с США. Все остальные будут делать то, что скажут США.
We see that he wasn't correct. Actually, today, while I'm recording this video, United States voted against the resolution stating that Russia is aggressor country. Nevertheless, the resolution of United Nations was taken without United States. And here's the other speaker already, Naryshkin, who is a head of the Russian foreign intelligence, and probably he, together with Patrushev, they understood where everything of that leads. It leads to the big war. And for the last moment, he and Patrushev, they wanted to stop this circus because it was dedicated to recognize those republics as a sovereign republics without the possibility to integrate those to Ukraine. While Patrushev, he is sitting on the right here, he stated that it's better to continue negotiations not between Russia and Ukraine, but between Russia and the United States, and it's better not to cancel Minsk agreements. And the same stuff was also said by Naryshkin, and it was a legendary dialogue. Let's watch it.
Предложить им в кратчайшие сроки заставить Киев пойти на мир и выполнить Минские соглашения. В противном случае мы должны принять то решение, о котором сегодня говорится.
Что значит, в противном случае вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс?
Нет, я...
Или признавать суверенитет их?
А я
Говорите прямо.
Я поддержу предложение о признании...
Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей.
Поддерживаю предложение...
Так и скажите, да или нет.
Да. Поддерживаю предложение о вхождении Донецкой и Луганской народных республик в состав Российской Федерации.
Да, мы об этом не говорим, мы этого не обсуждаем. Мы говорим о признании их независимости или нет.
Да, я поддерживаю предложение о признании независимости.
Хорошо, пожалуйста.
What did Naryshkin say about the integration of those republics to Russia? Because he already knew Putin's plan. They don't need those parts of the territories to be independent. No, they want to annex Ukraine. And definitely he was afraid of it, as well as his colleague Patrushev. So everything that day went according to Putin's scenario. Later that day, ruble plunged down to around 90 rubles per dollar. But since that time, ruble, I would say, relatively is quite stable, especially now after negotiations, possible negotiations between the United States and Russia. A usual Russian political TV show on Russia 1 channel. They were discussing the main question: in what borders those regions would be recognized as Russia as sovereign republics, the occupied territory by the time, or the full oblasts of Ukraine, Donetsk and Lugansk, which Russia fails to occupy even today. Well, later it became understandable that Russia wanted full regions of Ukraine. And later on Putin went on TV saying that Ukraine is not just a neighboring country, it's the same as Russia, with the same people, same history, usual bullshit, he says. He also blames Lenin and Khrushchev, who separated this territory of Ukraine from Russia. Yeah, you know, Putin has strange history narratives. Putin says that Lenin created Ukraine and Ukraine started decommunization, so Putin may show what a real decommunization is, meaning that he wants to return Ukraine back to Russia to unite it in a common state. Putin said that a mine that was planted by Lenin exploded in 1980s. He's saying about the collapse of the Soviet Union, which for him personally is a great tragedy, as he said about it many of the times. Then Putin said lots of the stuff about the threat for Russia and about precise missiles with a very short flight time because NATO is very close to Russia. Well, actually it became even closer after Putin started this full-scale war. And later on Putin said that they recognized the sovereignty of LPR and DPR, self-proclaimed republics. In the middle of Donetsk, the occupation administration immediately launched some of the fireworks. They were waving some of the Russian flags, so it was accepted as something big and positive. But we see that there were just few of the people on the streets. The same day, Putin published his presidential decree from the 1st of February 2022 of the recognition of the sovereignty of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. At the very end here, they say that Russia will use its forces to support those republics, according to agreement between those. And that evening, I performed my last flight as an airline pilot. I flown to Dubai, later on to Delhi, and then came back in roughly 2 days. That's what I've recorded on my short video.
Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and I'm going to fly on that beautiful airplane Boeing 737 as a passenger to Dubai. After that I'm gonna travel to Rosenheim. Unfortunately I will not stay in Dubai, I will not able to film the layover there. And about the situation in Ukraine, everything is normal for now. I'm positive about everything. We still have everything as usual casual life. We have even flights ongoing. I know that some of the airlines like KLM, Lufthansa, Swiss, they canceled the flights, but no worries my friends, so far everything is normal. And it will be the stupid action from Russia to come to Ukraine.
Yeah, it was. Why did I say that? Because it was understandable that the Ukrainians will resist, they will not accept Russia in Ukraine. But it seems like Putin thought that Ukrainians will greet his army with flowers. It really shows how far politicians and government might be from reality. Despite all of those intelligence services, but people know more. 2 a.m. 22nd of February, Zelensky comes out with his speech because it was his response to Putin's, and here Zelensky again tries to calm down everyone. He said that there is no any reason for your anxiety. Morning newspapers of 22nd of February, Putin warns of bloodshed as he moves troops to Ukraine. The Times, Putin sends tanks into Ukraine. Again, it's the 22nd of February. They made this conclusion on what Putin stated before. But by that particular time, the Russian army was still in Russia and Belarus. Afternoon of February 2022, Russian Duma, so the Russian parliament, ratifies the agreement between self-proclaimed republics and the Russian Federation. From now on, they say they're sovereign republics. As we know right now, it's not like that any longer. A Ukrainian expert in the Russian propaganda studio, yes, by the time sometimes it was like that even, well, he says that the big war between Ukraine and Russia is just imminent and there will be thousands of casualties. Well, the Russian propagandists Skabeva say that no, everything will be normal. We are there to provide peace for those regions. Later on, they put the leader of the self-proclaimed Republic of Donetsk in the ear. He was standing there on the background. You can see some of the empty refugee camps. Skabeva asked him whether they want to use Russian forces to reach all of the borders of the oblast, and Pushilin answered that time will show. The same day, Lukashenko warned about the possible war between Slavs, Russians and Ukrainians, but mostly he blamed Ukrainian side for the possible escalation. Evening of 22nd February 2022, Putin sends his proposal to the Russian Senate to ratify the usage of the military forces of the Russian Federation abroad. In the Russian media, they continue to show pictures of poor people evacuated from Donbass. Yeah, there were 4 of the kaboom which Russia did as provocations, and because of that, they started this circus with evacuation. The deputy of the Russian Defense Minister Alexander Fomin reads out the ratified decision to use military forces of Russia abroad.
So, how do you see the situation?
I think that what Putin has done is a gross violation of international law.
President of France Emmanuel Macron calls to the leaders of European countries, including UK, to Boris Johnson, where he stated that Russia is up to start a full-scale war. He even said that Russia will try to get Kiev.
А в Конституции прописаны границы в рамках.
Putin here puts the final point. Russia recognizes republics within their legit full borders, including territories which are under control by Ukraine.
So I'm going to begin to impose sanctions.
Sorry guys for the bad video quality. I take most of the video images from Telegram or Twitter, that's why the quality is not that great. Anyways, Joe Biden later on comes out with his address to people, saying that Putin wants to justify the occupation of new territories. Biden says that there is the risk not just for Donbass, but for the main cities of Ukraine, including a capital city. In his final attempt, Biden calls Putin to stop and not to start the big war. But as we know, Putin didn't listen anyone.
With a nation called Ukraine.
Our friend Tucker Carlson said by the time that Ukraine is not a democratic state and that Putin might start the war because of the Democrats in the United States. Yeah, as usual, total delulu. 23rd of February, newspapers, again, even with the bigger headlines. Yeah, some of the yellow press here, but every media says the same. Sanctions, start of the war, Putin, Ukraine, Zelensky. But after all, the main word is war. But still, 23rd of February is a usual day for everyone. After all, the war hadn't been yet started, and Russians are just celebrating their Army Day. Zelensky meets his colleagues from Lithuania and Poland. He says that the Ukrainian army is ready for everything. Latvian Prime Minister says that according to his information, Russian forces are entering Donbass. After meeting with foreign leaders, Zelensky started a conference between business and Ukrainian military, where Ukrainian Defense Minister Reznikov reassures business that it's secured. Pushilin gives his own interview saying that Ukraine should withdraw the forces from Donetsk People's Republic voluntarily, but there are also some other solutions which involve the usage of the Russian armed forces. The Ukrainian parliament introduces the emergency state, but it doesn't resolve anything. It's not a martial law or something like that. Morning time in the United States of America, Pentagon officials confirmed the presence of the Russian armed forces on occupied territory of Donbass. President Macron called to Vladimir Zelensky. They had a very tense conversation. Macron is sure that the war will start in the coming hours. He asked the... Oh, shit. It's kind of hard for me to record this video because I experienced the same events again, guys. I was in Ukraine by the time. It's a terrible deja vu, especially then you know how many people died. So Macron asked Zelensky about the readiness of the Ukrainian armed forces. And Zelensky said that they've all been told about the possible Russian aggression and that the risks are definitely high. French president promised military support, delivering some of the goods tomorrow with French military airplanes. Afternoon of 23rd of February, a document was published in internet dated from the 22nd of February, which was signed by the leaders of the self-proclaimed republics to use Russian armed forces to help them to fight Ukrainian aggression. In the letter, they say how they suffer. Close to evening, Zelensky comes out with his speech, telling also Russians that Ukraine is there not for war. They want to live normal life as Russians do. There should be no war started. But yes, at the same time, Zelensky understands that the war is imminent already. My friends, by the way, if you want to support the job that I do here on YouTube, I highly recommend you to check out my Patreon page. You may find it in the video description just below. Thank you so much for supporting my motivation. 24th of February 2022. At night there was the report from the Ukrainian border post in Milovoye, Lugansk Oblast about the movement of the Russian forces towards their side. The representative of militia of the self-proclaimed Republic of Donetsk said that they're going to return back territories in a peaceful way, but everything could happen. A Ukrainian border control post in Kalanchak with occupied Crimea. Here the officer of the Ukrainian border control unit saw the movement of the Russian forces towards him. Shooting is reported in many of the checkpoints, but mostly in Luhansk Oblast. The first casualty was Denis Tkach, who was unalive in Zorinka village, right at the border with Russia. Russians also started to use artillery systems. Meanwhile, Ukraine calls to Eurocontrol to close the airspace over its entire territory because it's unsafe to fly over Ukraine. The notices to airmen introduced immediately. All of the aircraft over Ukraine should leave it. By the time I was monitoring Flight Radar 24, I wasn't sleeping. It was, yes, during the nighttime, roughly at 3 a.m. And I saw how many of the airplanes were indeed leaving our airspace, landing in their alternates. By the time I woke up my wife and told her that something is really up to happen immediately. And yes, I already returned from my trip to Delhi, just the day before the full-scale war started. Simultaneously, the Russian channel started to broadcast the address of their leader, where he stated that Russia was humiliated by West and they gonna return everything back. At that moment, I personally already understood that it's the start of the war, so I called my wife to start pack things, belongings, to leave our place, because we used to live very close to the military base, like 50 meters away across the road. In New York, there is the emergency meeting of the United Nations happening. Guterres called Putin not to start the war and to stop it immediately. Stop your forces, do not attack Ukraine. Give a chance for the peace solution. Meanwhile, Putin's address continues and I was packing my things with the family by that time. The audio of Putin's speech was just playing on my phone and I put it at the angle of the room. Then I heard the words that changed everything to before and after.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
It was 100% understandable that it's the big war between Ukraine and Russia. There is no other way. Russia will be fully included. Before, they supported those separatists and so on, but now they're gonna attack Ukraine with everything they have. And we were looking at each other with my wife, then we heard loud bangs. Yeah, from the side of the military airport. Our house even was shaking, and we took everything we had very close to us and started to run for our car to leave the area. And only on the second day I've been told that those were not the Russian bombs which kaboomed near to our house. Those were the Ukrainian air defense systems which tried to shut down Russian cruise missiles heading towards Ukrainian infrastructural objects. So then S-300 air defense launches the missile. Yes, it could be very loud. And that's the Russian TV right after Putin's address. Good morning, they say. The winter is going to the end. The spring is coming. CNN reporter in Kiev, Matthew Chance, heard the explosion.
Oh, I tell you what, I just heard a big bang right here behind me. I thought we shouldn't have done the live shot here. There are big explosions taking place in Kiev right now. I can't see where they're taking place from this vantage point here on top of the roof of the hotel in central Kiev.
Meanwhile, Russia fires towards Novakhovka. It's the southern part of Ukraine. Russians use Grads and they cross the Ukrainian border in many of the points. Meanwhile, Russia also bombs Odessa. One of the Russian missiles hit quite a populated area in the central part of Kiev. In United Nations, Ukrainian ambassador Kislitsa confronts Nebeza, representative from the Russian Federation. Russia becomes a country which started a massive war. Morning time, sun goes up and Russia continues with its special military operation. They target some of the villages and towns of Luhansk Oblast. A huge Russian military convoy crosses the border between Belarus and Ukraine via the Three Sisters checkpoint. And here we see the markings on the Russian vehicles. Later in the morning, the National Security Advisor of the White House, Jake Sullivan, called President Zelensky. Zelensky asked American side to call all of the leaders and insist for Putin to stop this war. Zelensky also stated that Ukraine will resist and fight back Russians. Kharkiv Oblast locals film how Russians use artillery. Simultaneously, Russian forces are crossing the border between occupied territory of Crimea and Ukrainian-controlled territory. Still, my friends, I don't have the answer why there was no attempt to stop Russians from advancing from Crimea. Moreover, the area around was demined, and Ukrainian government doesn't tell us why it happened. Later on, the Russians proceeded and occupied the vast part of Ukraine, especially in the south, and that basically led to the blockade of Mariupol. Zelensky, in the morning, with his first address during the war time, he said that Ukraine introduces a martial law to fight Russians who cross the border with their military. In some of the regions, Ukrainian military kabooms the bridges on their own will without any sort of the command from the high military. Those actions actually help to stop the Russian army assaults in many of the points. Russia strikes the Ukrainian military airfield in Chernobyevka. Chernobyevka will become a very popular airfield because you know why. Actually, that day Russia targeted many of the Ukrainian military airfields. But luckily, Ukrainian aviation mostly survived. For the strikes, Russia used cruise missiles. Russian attack helicopters K-52 flying on the way to Ukrainian-controlled territory from Crimea. By the way, Russia already lost the most part of those helicopters. The same helicopters were spotted in Luhansk region. In big cities, metro start to function as the shelter for civilians. Despite Putin's claim that Russia will strike just military infrastructure of Ukraine, several of the Russian missiles hit civilian residential buildings. A big Russian military convoy was spotted in Genichinsk, not far away from Crimea. In Kharkiv, Russian forces were spotted already near the city in a ring road of it. French president's advisor and diplomat Emmanuel Bon stated that yes, the war had been started by Russia. All of the world was shocked that morning. The main editor of the Russia Today channel, Margarita Simonyan, said that it's the standard repetition of the Russian military parade. This time we've decided to do it in Kiev. As you know, the only military parade which Russia did in Kiev was with their destroyed vehicles. Ukrainian Border Control published the address of the Russian military ship to defenders of the Snake Island. And yes, you know this legendary answer which our guys gave to the Russian military ship. The phrase "Russian ship, go and fuck yourself" became a symbol and helped to motivate Ukrainians at the very beginning of this full-scale war. In Mariupol and other Ukrainian cities, people leave their homes. They try to escape the possible war zone. The city of Kiev is absolutely swallowed by the traffic jams. There is not enough fuel and lots of the car queues are created in front of the gas stations. French journalists filmed the outcome of the Russian strike on some of the Ukrainian military facilities. It happened in one of the airfields. Then the Russian forces came very close to Kharkiv. Ukrainian defenders started active actions against them. The heavy fight happens with the first losses for the Russian side. Over the Dnieper River, Russians are trying to reach Gostomel airport with their helicopters to land their paratroop divisions. On the way, at least 2 of the helicopters were shot down by the portable manpads Strela. But most of the helicopters made it to their destination in Gostomel airport. Numerous of the videos were filmed by the eyewitnesses. Those helicopters were flying over Vyshgorod. At least 30 of the helicopters were spotted that time. Russian pilots are disturbed because of the losses. They didn't expect any sort of the resistance. A Ukrainian National Guard soldier, Sergei Fonatyuk, shot down the Russian Mi-8 helicopter right over the apron of Gostomel. Zelensky in his first press conference after the full-scale war started. He confirms that Ukraine will resist and all of the people who are willing to fight for Ukraine will be given enough support and weaponry. Meanwhile, near Kharkiv, the Russian losses have been confirmed. The BTR-4 and the Tiger vehicle of the Russian army were lost. Russian military, under the cover of their aviation, reached Kakhovka Dam, and later on they sent their reinforcements. You can see a Z symbol on the Russian vehicles. One more Russian helicopter, this time it is K-52, was shot down over Gostomel. It performed the emergency landing, crew survived and was evacuated. Meanwhile, Ukraine shuts down its own aircraft Antonov-26. Unfortunately, there were casualties. The Russian paratroopers who landed in Gostomel put their flag on ATC tower. 10 kilometers away from the Sumy city, the Russian military convoy was spotted. There were lots of the artillery and other vehicles. In general, all of the day, Russian military moved their forces to Ukrainian territory from Russia and Belarus. Bucha town near Kiev. Explosions are heard from Gostomel airport. The other big Russian convoy was spotted in Volchansk, Kharkiv region. They were going to Kharkiv. CNN reporters were nearly hit by the Russian paratroopers in Gostomel airport. But later on they were left alone by Russians and they filmed those unique pictures. Matthew Chance took his chance to film Russian soldiers from the very, very close perspective. It's unimaginable to have this report nowadays. In Sumy region, Russians also face resistance, but still Ukraine is in lack of coordination to stop the Russian assault. On the south, the Russian forces are crossing Antonovsky Bridge to reach Kherson city. Russian soldiers with fire occupy Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Employees of Chernobyl report that Ukrainian armed forces left the positions under the prevailing Russian army attack. In the evening, Russian tanks were spotted in the Sumy city. There were some of the fights in Sumy, but for the moment Russians didn't feel huge resistance. One more talk between Zelensky and Macron. Zelensky said that Russians' goal is to reach Kiev city. Zelensky alerted the special forces to resist, but he is not sure whether they can hold for a long time. Also, Zelensky told that Russia sent their special forces around Kiev, but actually it was a mistake. In this lack of the coordination, some of the Ukrainian forces were perceived as the Russian ones, so there were lots of the cases of the friendly fire between own army. And that created the picture of some sort of the storming of the capital city. Later on, Zelensky appears in front of the media in his usual nowadays amplitude, in a hockey jacket or shirt and unshaved face. There he announced the largest in a history sanction package which is applied on Russia. Ukrainian military continued to blow up the bridges. For example, this is Pecheneksky water storage in the Kharkiv region. Russians have to slow down their movement. Meanwhile, in Russia there were many of the anti-war meetings. For now, this situation is absolutely impossible. Russia lost their first military airplane. It was Antonov-26. Crew is gone. The airplane was carrying a military cargo. Then dark comes, Ukraine activates the resistance in the Sumy region, and in the Sumy city itself, there were many of the local fires reported because of the war action. During the nighttime, in Kharkiv direction, Russia started to prepare a new offensive with the help of artillery. You can see that huge fire. It's very intense. At the end of the day, the Russian military reaches Melitopol, which is still occupied. Kabuming more bridges helps Ukraine to stop the Russian attacks towards Kharkiv. The Ukrainian military starts to give rifles to civilians. Roughly 10,000 of the Kalashnikovs were given for the several hours. The Russian propaganda media reports in their TV shows that the Ukrainian regime is close to disaster. Russian army destroyed most of the Ukrainian military, including aviation, airfields, and air defense. Zelensky signs the document of the massive mobilization of Ukrainians. There are many of the volunteers who would like to grab rifles and fight for their country. At the middle of that year, Ukrainian army counted roughly 700,000 soldiers. In his evening address, Zelensky said about the defenders of the Snake Island and about the Russian ship. For that moment, the information was spread that Ukrainian defenders lost their lives, and we know that they were captured actually. Right over Kiev, Ukrainian air defense shut down the Russian aircraft. But there were also numerous of the friendly fires, especially during the first day of this full-scale war. And it was the end of the 24th of February. a day of the start of this full-scale war. Well, the next day Ukraine would kaboom the bridge across Irpin, which would hold the Russian forces out from Kiev. And in a month, Ukraine would throw Russian forces out, causing them to retreat from Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, later on partially from Kharkiv and Kherson regions. Guys, tell me if you like those kind of the analysis from the historical perspective of the war. I think that it is kind of interesting to look at the events from our today's perspective, because people start to forget how it happened. Some even blame Ukraine for starting this war. That's why it's very important to remember the history. Now guys, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.